What's up, Steve? How you doing?
Doing great. How are you, my friend?
I'm excellent. Excellent. Life is great here in the Carolinas.
Absolutely. Do you think? Well, I'll start with this. Then I'll get to a couple of college football questions. Do you think there is any genuine interest down there in Baker Mayfield?
I do. I really do. And I actually said recently here locally, because I was asked about it, and my response is simply, you don't make the trade unless you think he is the future of the franchise. To me, if you make the trade, eat the $18 million, that tells me that you think he's more than a one-year stopgap. The additional piece of that is you'd be giving up additional trade assets like you did with Sam Darnold. Right. To me, you don't do that for a one-year rental. If they do that for a one-year rental and the guy walks this next offseason, then what have you really done? So to me, I would suspect if they're going to make that kind of a trade, it wouldn't surprise me if an extension with him came very soon after, because you feel like he is the future. If you don't feel like he's the future of your franchise for at least two more seasons, then you force the Browns to release him, in which case then you're in a bidding war, but you know he's getting $18 million, so you can be a little bit more selective about how much money you're going to spend, and you allow him to go anywhere else, perhaps to the Carolina Panthers if he chooses to bid. And what I would sell to him in that situation is, hey, listen, we're going to pay you whatever it is. We're going to pay you maybe $4 or $5 million for this year, but we suspect that you're going to be the future. Sam Darnold, we're going to let him walk out the door at the end of this year, and it's going to be your football team to have moving forward if you don't trade for him. And that's why, to me, if you trade, then you put the extension on it, because you've already given up those assets anyway. So you better make sure you have a long-term plan with him. So to me, I think that's where that's where you have to split the hairs, if you will.
But at this point in the NFL, and especially the situation that Mayfield's in, he probably would only cost a 5th or 6th round pick. 8. I mean 1. Don't you think?
Yeah, well, yeah. The draft capital would be lower. But then again, we saw them, and if I'm Cleveland, I'm pushing the issue. I'm trying to get from the Panthers at least what the New York Jets got for Sam Darnold, which is multiple picks. Right. Because my selling point, if I'm the Cleveland Browns, is he's better than Sam Darnold. And that's a fact.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's a fact, but the Browns right now have Deshaun Watson. They've got to get rid of him. I mean, part of the problem is the Browns have put themselves in this position, right?
They have. The one advantage the Browns have, and I'm not suggesting this is what they should do, is the fact that Deshaun Watson is only a cap hit of about $1 million this year allows them to eat the Baker Mayfield salary if they need to, right. Because between the two players, they're still under $20 million at the quarterback position, which you and I both know, and anybody that's listening very well knows, that is grand theft auto in the National Football League, right. To have your quarterback position cost you less than $20 million.
Well, but of course, part of that is it's structured in such a way where if it's suspended, it only costs, it's only $1 million.
Agreed. Right. And they structured it, which a lot of people are on whatever side of the Deshaun Watson thing that they're on, and that's fine. It just looks more and more likely that the suspension for Deshaun Watson will be long. Mm-hmm. I had predicted and had said to some people that I would be shocked if he played this season coming up. Mm-hmm. And some people said to me, I don't think so. I even had one person that's pretty respected NFL-wise tell me he didn't think Deshaun Watson was going to get suspended at all. I think that ship has sailed, especially with number 23 and number 24 in terms of those suits against Deshaun Watson.
Interesting all the way through. Very interesting along the way. All right. College sports. You work in an area and you work around teams where the transfer portal pretty much works one way, and that's usually out. How tough is it for the teams now? And because some are FCS, some are FBS that you are around all the time. How tough is that for them to deal with, that their players are targeted in some ways as transfer portal opportunities for some of the bigger fish?
It's almost impossible for them to continue to stay at a high level with the way they compete, because when you have to have a coach that is basically responsible for mining the transfer portal every day to see who goes in there, who might trickle down to you, as well as in some cases finding out that one of your players has gone in there at the same time, that is a lonely feeling. At the end of the day, many of these young players, there is a notion, and this is why I think what maybe Deion Sanders is doing at Jackson State, and now if you look at some of the recruiting numbers, what Mike Minter at Campbell is doing is very, very important. Campbell also in the same conference as one of the schools I work for, Gardner-Webb, is very important, because I think if you look up 3 years from now, and the young man Travis Hunter at Jackson State, he was one of the top 4 or 5 high school players in the country. In some rankings, he was number 1, and others he was 2 or 3. If he ends up being a top 5 NFL draft pick out of Jackson State 3 years from now, then I think the narrative will start to change. I think the visual will start to change. And I think the transfer portal might slow down a little bit, because it'll then be proven if you put together a string of good seasons at an FCS program, at an HBCU, you can still be a top-level pick in the draft. Right now, the narrative is, you're just not going to quite get there, because people are going to question your competition. They're going to question your development. They're going to question what resources you may or may not have had around you at the collegiate level. I know an NFL coach who has said to me flat out, it would be great to get some of these guys from smaller schools, but they understand even at the NFL level, they don't have as good a training table. They don't necessarily have the resources in terms of strength and conditioning people. They don't have, as many coaches and as many different developmental people to teach them how to watch film and all these little things at some of the smaller schools that they have the resources to do at a place like Penn State, with what James Franklin is continuing to lead based on what Coach Paterno built. You don't have all of those resources. So I think from that standpoint, it's going to be an important evolution to watch over the years. But I think it's very important that kids like Travis Hunter and some of those guys that Mike Minter got at Campbell out of high school as top-level recruits end up being top-level draft picks.
We hear, Reginald, about name, image, and likeness, the speech that Nick Saban made to the Birmingham business leaders, and, of course, then became a problem with Texas A&M. What Ryan Day said to the Columbus business leaders about $13 million, the hard push here at Penn State. Down there, what is that like, name, image, and likeness, and what kind of push, if any, is there down there?
It's not as big a push. And by the way, I have to give James Franklin a lot of credit for the way he sort of handled that question and how he framed it. Mm-hmm. Didn't name anybody else, laid out school X, this is what they have, why wouldn't I have the same? That he answered that perfectly, in my opinion. But to your point, I don't think, and from what I'm hearing from the NIL standpoint, that's not as big an issue down here, particularly the schools I deal directly with. Now, you're talking about a Group of 5 program in Charlotte who's about to make a move to the American Athletic Conference, and Gardner-Webb, a school that is in the Big South at the FCS level, so it's a little bit different. But from the NIL standpoint, I'll be curious to see, especially in the next couple of years, because we all know Tobacco Road, North Carolina, this is a basketball state. And so I think that's where we're going to see some interesting inroads with NIL, is with basketball in this state. But I think the one thing I have noticed, and the one thing I think, Steve, is going to really be the kicker to this thing is some of these organizations, some of these businesses, let me rephrase that, because the NIL collectives are one thing, but some of these businesses, they're going to have to figure out what is the ROI. And I think from that standpoint, I think in the next few years, we'll see some of these numbers sort of start to plateau and perhaps come down a little bit, and get a little bit more conservative, to use that term, instead of so aggressive with the amount of money that these young players are getting. And I think the other thing you'll start to see is as that money kind of goes down, you'll see a little bit less of the back channeling to get kids to jump in the portal because of NIL deals, and they'll be more likely to stay put at certain places, even with maybe some smaller deals, because they'll realize the market has kind of flattened out.
Yeah, and that's going to be one of the keys, I think, to this in the next 5 years. At some point, I mean, not everybody feels this way, but at some point, people want a return quote on their investment. I mean, do you think that's a fair statement?
That's a completely fair statement. I think the only people that are not looking for a return on their investment, obviously besides essentially the NIL collectives, and that's because many of them are tied directly to the university's alumni groups or whatever the case may be.
Right.
The only ones that aren't looking for profit or for that ROI are those types of organizations and the folks back in the Live Golf Tour because, well, we know why they're doing that. So
right.
From that standpoint, there you go. And so I think that's where it's going to kind of flatten out. And, Steve, I continue to say this, and if there's any young high school player or college player listening, look, I'm not telling kids they shouldn't go into the transfer portal. If it makes sense for you, if it's the best decision for you, I get it. But just make sure it's the best decision, because I see way too many kids go into that transfer portal, Steve, and they never come out, and it oftentimes will end a college career, and that is concerning to me.
Well, yeah, it's concerning, but the problem is they're being told by others around them that the grass is greener on the other side. That is a problem.
They are. Yeah, it is. And I hope, that the players that have to go through this, are able to hold these people accountable and sit down with them and say, look what you did, look where your advice sitting. Now, at the end of the day, it's on the player to ultimately make the decision.
Yeah.
And so I just encourage them to really think about the decision that they're making when they make it and understand that there is a chance, right? Because, Stevie Jones can be a great outside linebacker on his way into the portal, and then all of a sudden LeVar Arrington jumps into the portal 30 seconds before him, and the coach who said, Steve Jones, I'm going to take care of you, goes, well, there's LeVar Arrington. I think I'm going to take care of LeVar Arrington. And Steve Jones is out there in the cold. And that's where, this thing gets a little bit off the rails, in my opinion.
Well, it's off the rails if you think I'm a talented linebacker. All right, so let's – Reginald, have a great weekend. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve. And look, I'm going to say this to you. You obviously have your children, so happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
But you certainly are a patriarch that a lot of us as former Penn State football players and obviously graduates appreciate. So happy Father's Day to you. Hope you have a great weekend.
I appreciate that more than I can say. Thank you for saying that, even thinking that. Thanks, Reginald. Hey, have a great weekend.
You too.